The silence. That was the first thing I noticed after it all ended. Not the peaceful silence of a sleeping house, but the heavy, hollow silence that settles when a whole life is packed away in boxes and memories. My dear Manfred had been gone 6 months, and the house we built together, brick by brick, laugh by laugh, now felt like a mausoleum to our dreams. Every room echoed his absence. The leather armchair in the living room, with the permanent imprint of his shoulders, the faint smell of his pipe tobacco still lingering in the study, his side of the bed, untouched and cold. I was drowning in a sea of memories, and grief was an anchor pulling me down. It was on a particularly grey Sunday afternoon that Jonas, my only son, and his wife, Mary, came to visit. They entered with that practiced air of concern that young people often have when dealing with the elderly and bereaved. They brought a cornmeal cake, my favourite, and Mary's smile was as sweet as the guava paste topping. "Mum, we don't like seeing you like this, so alone in this huge house," Jonas began, taking my hand. His hand was large and strong, like Manfred's. I closed my eyes for a moment. Mary sat on my other side, her floral perfume filling the air. "Jonas and I were talking and thinking. We love you, and we want you to be happy again. We want to take care of you." My heart, a tired and aching muscle, gave a small leap of hope. To take care, what a beautiful word. For so many years, I was the caregiver. I took care of Jonas when he was a little boy with scraped knees and nightmares. I took care of Manfred in his last days, when illness robbed him of his strength, but never the sparkle in his eyes. The idea of being cared for was a balm. "We're thinking of buying a house, Mom," Jonas said, his eyes shining with excitement. "A place of our own, with a garden for the children, God willing, a place with enough room for everyone." Mary finished the sentence, as if they had rehearsed it. "A place with a special room just for you, a place where you'll never feel alone again." The picture they painted was idyllic. A garden, the sound of grandchildren's laughter I hadn't yet met, the company of my son. It was an antidote to the silence, to the loneliness. But there was an obstacle, the shadow that looms over all working-class dreams. "Money. That's wonderful, my children," I said, my voice a little shaky. "But a house, it's such a big commitment. Do you have the savings for that?" Jonas and Mary exchanged a look. It was a quick glance, almost imperceptible, but one that contained a whole conversation. That's when the proposal came, wrapped in words of love and concern. "Mum," Jonas said, his voice low and serious, "we know about Dad's life insurance. We know he left it to you to ensure your comfort." He paused, as if choosing his words with a surgeon's care. What if you helped us, invested in us, in our family? It would be an investment in your own future, in your happiness. The life insurance. 180,000 euros. Manfred had worked hard for every cent of that money. "So you'll never depend on anyone, my dear," he'd told me, weeks before he passed. "So you'll have your peace." Jonas's proposal seemed to directly contradict his father's wish. But at the same time, what peace did I have in that empty house? What comfort was there in solitude? Perhaps Manfred, with his practical wisdom, would agree that the best way to ensure my peace was to be surrounded by family. Mary, sensing my hesitation, put her hand on mine. It was soft and warm. "Think of it as a family business," she said, with her most charming smile. "You wouldn't be giving us the money. You'd be buying your share in the house, a part of our future, and we'll make a solemn promise. You'll always have a roof over your head, a place at our table, forever. We'll take care of you as you would take care of us, forever." The word resonated in my mind. It was a powerful promise, an oath. I looked at my son's face, the boy I had cradled in my arms, and at his wife, who seemed so sincere. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. The alternative was silence, the empty house, the solitude. That night I barely slept. I tossed and turned in bed, Manfred's ghost beside me. What would he say? He was always cautious, especially with money. "Trust, but verify," was one of his mottos. But how could I ask my own son for a contract? How could I treat an act of family building as a cold business transaction? It would poison everything from the start. In the end, the desire to belong, to be needed, to escape the prison of my grief overcame caution. The following week, I went to the bank. The manager, a kind man who had known Manfred for years, raised an eyebrow when I explained what I planned to do. "Are you sure, Mrs. Helena? It's a considerable amount, your entire security." "It's an investment in my family, Mr. Schmidt," I replied, with more confidence than I felt. "They'll take care of me." The transfer was made. 180,000 euros. Manfred's life's work, transformed into a digital number that disappeared from my account and reappeared in Jonas's. I felt a chill, a dizzying sensation, as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff. But then, the image of the garden, of the grandchildren's laughter came back to my mind, and I forced myself to smile. The house hunt was quick. Jonas and Mary already had one in mind, a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, with a small garden in the back. It was beautiful, I had to admit. When we visited, they were already handing out the papers. "This will be our room," Mary said, pointing to the master suite upstairs. "And that's the baby's room." They took me downstairs to a room next to the kitchen. It was small, with a single window overlooking the neighbor's house. The air was a little damp. "And this is yours, Mom," Jonas said with a slightly forced enthusiasm. "Easy access, no stairs to worry about. You'll have your privacy." "It's perfect," I murmured, trying to ignore the feeling of being set aside, like an antique piece of furniture that doesn't match the new decor. The move was a whirlwind. I packed decades of life into cardboard boxes, each object a story. The vase Manfred and I bought on our honeymoon in Italy, the black and white photos of my parents, Jonas's childhood drawings. I had to leave a lot behind. "There's no space, Mum," Mary said, with a gentleness that cut like glass. "The new house has a more minimalist style." Minimalist. It felt like my whole life was being minimalized. The day I moved into my new room, they helped me unpack. That night, we sat down for our first dinner together in the new house. Jonas opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. "A toast," he said, raising his glass, "to our new home, and to the best mom and mother-in-law in the world who made all this possible." Mary smiled and clinked her glass against mine. "To family," she said. I smiled back, my heart aching. I had done the right thing. I had traded an empty house for a family. I had invested in my future, in my happiness. The silence had been broken. I was no longer alone. In that moment, under the warm light of the new dining room, I believed it with all my might. I clung to their promise like a castaway clings to a piece of wood, forever. I couldn't know then that the sea I was about to enter was far more treacherous than the loneliness I had left behind, and that their promise was as fragile as sea foam. The first few weeks were like a feverish dream of domesticity. A routine settled in with the ease of a river finding its bed. I woke up early, a lifelong habit, and made coffee for the 3 of us. The smell of toast and fresh coffee filling the house was my small contribution, my way of saying thank you and I belong here. Jonas left for work, and Mary, who worked from home as a graphic designer, stayed. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the weather, about the news. It seemed normal, comfortable. I told myself I had made the right choice. The first crack appeared so subtly that I almost didn't notice it. It was because of a photograph, a portrait of Manfred and me taken on our 25th anniversary. We were on a cruise, the Mediterranean sun on our faces, and we had a genuine, carefree smile. I had placed it in a silver frame and positioned it on the living room shelf next to a modern vase Mary had bought. To me, it was the perfect union of past and present, the family root allowing the new flower to bloom. One afternoon, returning from the market, I noticed the photo was gone. My heart skipped a beat. I searched the living room, the kitchen, and finally found it on the dresser in my bedroom, the downstairs bedroom. "Mary!" I called, trying to keep my voice calm. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a dishcloth. "Yes, Helen?" Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The photo of Manfred and me. Why is it in my room?" "Oh, that," she said with a little giggle. "I was reorganizing the shelf. You know, trying to keep the line clean and minimalist. I thought the silver frame didn't quite match the copper details I'm using. But don't worry, I found a perfect place for it in your room, where you can see it all the time." She spoke as if she were doing me a favor. And what could I say? That the photo wasn't just for me, but to remind everyone, Jonas, of where he came from, that his father's legacy wasn't a decorative accessory that could be discarded for not matching. Saying that would make me seem like a bitter, sentimental old woman, so I swallowed my words and forced a smile. "Of course, thanks for thinking of it." From that day on, Mary's little reorganizations became more frequent. The vase I brought from my old house, a ceramic piece Manfred gave me, ended up in the back of a cupboard. "It's a little too rustic for the living room, don't you think, Helen?" she said. My recipe books, with notes and stains from a lifetime of cooking for my family, were removed from the kitchen. With the internet, who needs paper books, right? They take up so much space. Each of my objects disappearing from the common areas was like a small part of me being erased from the house. I was being subtly confined to my small downstairs bedroom, my identity contained within those 4 walls. Jonas seemed oblivious to it all. When I tried, very carefully, to mention the subject, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Mum, you're overthinking it. Mary just has good taste. She's trying to make the house pretty for all of us. The house is hers too. It's mine too, Jonas, I said softly. Remember our agreement. And nobody's saying it isn't, he replied, already a little impatient. But you have to understand that things change. You have to be a little more flexible. Flexible, the word you use when you want someone to bend until they break. The dynamic between us began to shift in a more palpable way. The morning conversations in the kitchen became shorter. Mary often appeared already wearing her headphones, furiously typing on her laptop, creating an invisible barrier. Family dinners, which initially anchored my day, became less frequent. "We're exhausted today, Mom," Jonas would say. "Let's order pizza and eat it in our room while watching a show." The question, "Would you like a piece?" rarely came. I started making my own food, eating alone in the kitchen while listening to their laughter from upstairs. The silence I so feared was returning, but this time it was crueler, a self-imposed silence punctuated by the happiness of others I wasn't a part of. The most painful blow came last month. I've always loved gardening. It was my therapy, my connection to the earth. The small backyard garden was one of the reasons I agreed to this house. I dreamed of planting tomatoes, herbs, maybe some roses, like the ones Manfred used to bring me. I started preparing a small bed in the corner. I bought soil, some seeds. I spent an entire afternoon on my knees, feeling the earth under my nails, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The next day I woke up and saw that my bed had been covered with a black tarp and white stones. Where I planted my tomatoes, there was now a set of cold, modern-looking white metal patio furniture and one of those fire pits. I stood at the back door, my heart pounding. There was no misinterpreting it. It was a statement. When Mary finally came downstairs, I confronted her. This time, there was no being subtle. "The garden. Where are my things?" she sighed, a long theatrical sigh of someone dealing with a stubborn child. "Helena, I told you we had plans for the garden. A lounge area. You can't just decide to dig a hole and plant vegetables. It ruins the whole design." "Ruins the design?" My voice came out louder than I intended. "Mary, it was a small corner. A place for me. It was the only thing I asked for. And we're giving you a roof, food, security," she retorted, the sweetness completely disappearing from her voice, replaced by a sharp, resentful tone. "We thought that would be enough. Apparently we were naive to think you'd be grateful." The word grateful hit me like a slap. Grateful for being slowly pushed out of the family life I myself had financed. Grateful for being treated like a burden, an inconvenient piece of furniture. The argument ended with Jonas coming home and attempting to play peacemaker. "Let's all calm down," he said, without looking me in the eyes. "Mum, please don't start a fight. Mary is under a lot of stress with work." He defended her. He didn't even ask my side of the story. At that moment I understood. It wasn't just Mary. It was Jonas too. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. He was allowing this to happen, perhaps even encouraging it. My investment hadn't bought a share in the family. It had bought my own obsolescence. I retreated to my room, the sanctuary and cell they had assigned me. The door closed, and the tears I'd been holding back finally came. They were tears of sadness, yes, but also of anger. Anger at myself, for my naivete, for my desperate need not to be alone. I lay on the bed, my face buried in the pillow, and the echo of their promise mocked me. Forever. They would take care of me forever. Now I saw the truth. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted what I had. And now that they had it, I was just a loose end, an inconvenient reminder of the agreement they no longer intended to honor. The silence in my room was profound, but outside I could still hear the distant sound of their voices and laughter. And I knew with a terrible, cold clarity that I needed to stop being flexible before I broke completely. The night following the garden argument was a long, sleepless journey across a sea of humiliation and fury. The tears had dried, leaving behind a salty crust on my skin and a sharp chill in my chest. I didn't cry anymore. Crying was a weakness I could no longer afford. The mourning for the loss of my illusion was over. Now began the time of strategy. The sound of laughter from upstairs, which had previously stabbed me with the pain of exclusion, now sounded different. It sounded like the arrogance of victors celebrating too soon. They had underestimated the woman who raised the man Jonas had become, the woman who managed a home and a family budget for over 40 years, the woman who survived the loss of the love of her life. They saw me as a sentimental, docile old woman. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning I rose before the sun, as always. But my routine changed. I didn't go to the kitchen to make coffee for 3. I went to my room, closed the door, and made my own coffee in a small Italian coffee maker I kept, a remnant of a trip to Rome with Manfred. The aroma filled only my space, a small olfactory declaration of independence. I drank the strong, bitter coffee, sitting on the edge of my bed, and plotted a plan. Anger was fuel, but without a map, it would only burn aimlessly. I needed a map. The first step was information. I had been foolish, unforgivably foolish. The transaction of the sale of my house and the transfer of the money to Jonas had been made with the blind trust of a mother. There were papers, of course. Bank statements, the sales contract for my apartment. But our agreement, the promise of eternal care, was sealed with hugs and sweet words, not with a notary's ink. Or was it? I tried to remember. Jonas, always practical, had insisted on writing something down. "Just to make everything clear, Mom, for your own safety," he'd said. At the time, the gesture seemed a testament to his care. Now, I saw it could be my only weapon. Where was that document? I knew Jonas kept important documents in a small office he'd set up in the upstairs guest room. Entering there would be a risk. Mary worked from home, and her movements were unpredictable. I waited. Patience, I'd learned from Manfred, was the virtue of hunters and gardeners. I had become a hunter. I spent the morning acting in a way they didn't expect, with a cold, distant politeness. When Mary came downstairs, I had already washed my cup and was reading a book in my room. "Good morning, Helena," she said with a note of caution in her voice, probably expecting more tears or accusations. "Good morning, Mary," I replied, without looking up from my book. The silence that settled was heavy, dense. My indifference was more disconcerting to her than my grief. When Jonas left for work, we barely exchanged 2 words. He seemed guilty, avoiding my gaze. Good. Guilt was a crack in his armor. The opportunity arose around midday. Mary announced she needed to go to a meeting with a client and then to the gym. "I don't know what time I'll be back. Don't wait for me for lunch," she said from the doorway. The words sounded in my ears like the most beautiful of symphonies. As soon as the sound of her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I climbed the stairs, a territory I rarely explored, feeling like an intruder in my own financed house. Jonas's office was organized, minimalist, like everything Mary touched. Files, folders, everything in its place. I began to search. Time was my enemy. Every street noise made me jump. I looked in folders labeled bills, taxes, and personal. Nothing. Finally, I saw a dark wooden box at the back of a cupboard, under some piles of design magazines. It had no label. It looked old, personal. I opened it. Inside, mixed with old photographs from Jonas's childhood and letters I had written to him when I was in college, I found a clear plastic folder. And there it was, a 2-page document titled Private Family Agreement. My hands trembled as I read. The language was simple, not lawyer jargon. It stipulated that I, Helena Martins, would transfer the amount of X, the exact value of my apartment sale was there, listed in reais, to the joint account of Jonas Martins and Mary Lacerda. In exchange, they committed to providing me with housing, food, and all necessary care and support for the rest of my natural life, in the residence that would be purchased with the aforementioned funds. It was signed by the 3 of us. I remembered the day. We were in the kitchen of my old apartment among moving boxes. They gave me a pen and smiled. My signature was there, a little shaky. Theirs, firm and confident. I photographed each line of the document with my cell phone, zooming in to ensure everything was legible. I sent the images to my own email with the subject insurance policy and then deleted the photos from my phone. I put the document back exactly where I found it and tidied everything in the office, leaving no trace of my presence. I went down the stairs, my heart still racing, but now with a rhythm of triumph. I wasn't crazy. The promise was real, and it was on paper. The second step was to seek outside counsel, friends. I had distanced myself from many, involved first in mourning Manfred, then in the logistics of the move and trying to fit into the new family. There was one person, however, who wouldn't accept no for an answer. Lucy, my friend since youth, Jonas's godmother, a divorced, independent woman with a tongue as sharp as her mind. She had warned me gently about the agreement. "Helena, the heart is treacherous, but paper is patient," she had told me. I didn't listen. I gathered all my courage and dialed her number. "Hello?" Her voice sounded, strong and clear as always. "Lucy, it's Helena." There was a pause. "Helena, for God's sake, woman, I thought you'd been abducted. How are you? Why did you disappear?" The genuine concern in her voice opened a floodgate I had kept closed. "Lucy, I need help. I made a big mistake." I told everything. The promise, the sale of the house, the move, and then the cracks. The photo, the objects, the exclusion, culminating in the destruction of my garden bed and Mary's cruel word, ungrateful. I spoke for almost half an hour, a monologue of pain and disillusionment. Lucy listened patiently, interrupting only with a scoundrel or an "I can't believe it." When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "Helena," she said finally, and her voice had no pity, but steel. "First, stop blaming yourself. You acted out of love, and they acted out of greed. There's no moral equivalence there. Second, did you find the paper, the agreement you signed?" "Yes," I replied, feeling a wave of relief. "I found it today. I photographed everything." "Great!" she exclaimed, and I could imagine her gesturing. "That changes everything. This is no longer a family drama, dear. This is a breach of contract. You're not an ungrateful tenant. You're an investor who was defrauded. You need a lawyer." The word lawyer scared me. It meant war, a war against my own son. "But Lucy, Jonas is my son, and is he acting like one? Is he honoring and protecting you? Or is he letting his wife erase you from your own home? Helena, Manfred wouldn't want this for you. He would want you to fight for your money, for your dignity, for your future." The mention of Manfred was the blow I needed. She was right. Manfred would never tolerate me being treated like a doormat. He was a kind man, but with an iron spine, and he would expect the same from me. "You're right," I said, my voice firmer. "Of course I am," said Lucy. "I have a name for you. Dr. Alice Mendonça. She specializes in family law and estates. She's a lioness. Don't mention anything to Jonas or that minimalist design, stone-hearted daughter-in-law. Gather everything you have, the bank statements showing the money transfer, the sale contract for your apartment, and the photos of that family agreement. Schedule an appointment, just to know your options. Knowledge is power, Helena." I hung up the phone feeling 10 pounds lighter, and at the same time with a new weight on my shoulders, the weight of action. It wasn't about surviving in their house anymore. It was about building my escape route. That afternoon, when Mary returned, I was sitting in the living room on the main sofa reading my book. It was a small act, but significant. I was no longer confined to my room. When she put her gym bag on the floor and sighed, looking at me, I simply looked up and gave her a small, enigmatic smile before returning to my reading. I didn't offer help, didn't ask how her day was. I simply occupied the space. The confusion on her face was evident. She expected a defeated old woman, but found a calm and unwavering presence. The silent battle had begun. At dinner that night, I served myself first, sat at the table and began to eat, regardless of whether they were ready or not. Jonas tried to make small talk. "Was your day peaceful, Mom?" "Very productive, dear. I put some thoughts in order," I replied, with a clarity that made him blink. I knew the road ahead would be difficult and painful. Facing my son in court was a nightmare.